So a few words about the sermon. The topic was selected by Lorenzo, our music director. He had that fantastic opportunity because he was one of two high bids for the sermon in our February auction. So if you don't like the topic, so and I'm going to be really upfront. I am going to be sharing this sermon, but I'm seeing the topic through my lens as a white cisgendered male. One thing I've learned is oftentimes we don't see things that other folks can. So I apologize in advance if any of my words in some way land in an uncomfortable way with you, or if I stumble and misspeak. Also, just a warning for your precious, tender hearts, I will be quoting a few statements that contain explicitly racist language, so I want you to just take care of yourselves. Tanisha actually had two religions. First and foremost, she was a proud and is a proud Unitarian Universalist. She'd been raised from age 5 in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and by the time she bridged from high school into young adulthood, she was Unitarian Universalist, UU, through and through. Tanisha said, Unitarian Universalism is the place where I can be authentically me and authentically spiritual, while still being rooted in a tradition that has been shaped by spiritual visionaries who grew and changed to keep our faith relevant for the times. Tanisha actually had two religions. If Unitarian Universalism was her number one religion, a close second was the gospel according to Harry Potter. From the first page of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone to the last words of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the questing spirit of the Harry Potter series resonated deep in her soul. For Tanisha, there was something religiously real about that epic battle between good and evil, and that more intimate individual journey of those young people discovering and claiming their true identity. It was within her Unitarian Universalist congregation that Tanisha found the courage to come out as transgender and make that transition within the loving embrace of her church community. And it was within the wizarding world of Harry Potter that Tanisha found a mythology of authentic identity that helped her envision living her truth in the world. So, Tanisha was devastated when Harry Potter creator and author J.K. Rowling made multiple comments that many in the LGBTQ community experienced as anti-transgender, transphobic, and trans-shaming. Tanisha says, J.K. Rowling's comment felt like a clear attack on my authentic identity as a trans woman. I knew instantly that J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter were dead to me. I simply deleted them from my consciousness. I would read them no more. As Laurie told us so beautifully, cancel culture is a recent term created to describe the reaction to someone famous, respected, or influential who says or does something deemed offensive, hurtful, or hateful. The individual is then boycotted, ostracized, or shunned. They are, in essence, canceled. They're canceled because they are perceived to be creating great harm right now in this present moment. So cancel culture usually targets contemporary players. But what do we do if the harm was in the past? What do we do with our religious ancestors for whom the bulk of their contributions resonate with our contemporary Unitarian and Universalist values, but who were also flawed people and products of their time, which sometimes limited their ability to fully live out their religion's call for justice, equity, and dignity for all people? This question is especially live now in Unitarian Universalist churches, in this sanctuary, and in our larger denomination, as we recently began reckoning with our faith's long and shameful history of white supremacy culture. A reckoning that has led Unitarian Universalist congregations across the country to affirm a new eighth principle, third value, that calls us to work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive, and to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression within ourselves, our congregation, and our institutional denomination. Could we say that together? Oh, yeah, you want to clap? So let's say that. Work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive, and to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression within ourselves, our congregation, and our institutional denomination. So, when I stumbled upon Unitarian Universalism 30 years ago, I fell in love with the only place I have ever found that was big enough to hold all my questions, all my answers, and all my discoveries and new understandings yet to come. I fell in love with our amazing and rich history and the forebears and ancestors who shaped the faith I was now embracing. Our history included famous names like Thomas Jefferson, John and Abigail Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I loved that the Red Cross grew out of work the Unitarians were doing, treating wounded soldiers during the Civil War. I loved that some of our greatest writers and thinkers in American history were our spiritual ancestors, Unitarians like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, Emily Dickinson, Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, and even Kurt Vonnegut, among so many others. I love that one of the most influential abolitionists in the years before the Civil War was a Unitarian minister named Theodore Parker. I loved that we were the first denomination to ordain women into the ministry. Some still haven't caught up. Later, we were the first denomination to ordain openly gay people. I was and I am proud that more Unitarian clergy marched with Martin Luther King in Selma than from any other faith tradition in this country. I fell in love with Unitarian Universalism some 30 years ago, and in that time since, I've learned so much, I've grown so much, even as our faith tradition has learned so much and grown so much, especially in the last 8 to 10 years. We've learned that we have failed again and again to live up to our progressive religion's lofty ideals of justice and equity for all, especially in terms of race and gender equity. All this has led us to ask, as articulated in an email sent to me by Lorenzo, how do we handle those previously thought of as heroes, both Unitarian Universalists and otherwise, but who in recent times have been reassessed as white supremacists or otherwise problematic? What do we do with these ancestors from the past? For instance, how do we contend with our beloved Unitarian Walt Whitman? Let's hear it for Walt. A transcendentalist pioneer with an awesome beard who penned some of the most poetic language ever put to paper, including my favorite, in which Whitman revels in natural mysticism, saying, "Who makes much of a miracle? As to me, I know nothing else but miracles, whether I walk the streets of Manhattan or dart my sight over the roofs of houses toward the sky or wade with naked feet along the beach just to the edge of the water or stand under trees in the woods. As to me, I know nothing else but miracles." How do we grapple with this poetic Walt Whitman, an abolitionist who hated slavery, but who also wrote, quote, "Who believes that whites and blacks can ever amalgamate in America? Or who wishes it to happen? Nature has set an impassable seal against it. Besides, is not America for the whites? And is it not better so?" Unitarian Universalists affirm the inherent worthiness and dignity of all people. So what do we do with the 5 Unitarians who have been elected President of the United States, when one of them, Thomas Jefferson, enslaved over 600 people during his lifetime and routinely paid his debts by selling enslaved people and breaking up black families? Another president of the United States was John Quincy Adams, who never directly owned human beings, but allowed enslaved people to work in his households, including the White House. Another Unitarian president was Millard Fillmore, who ran for president on an anti-immigrant platform and oversaw the forcible removal of Native Americans from their tribal lands and ordered their incarceration on reservations. Millions perished. In 1850, that same President Millard Fillmore signed the Fugitive Slave Act, which required that escaped enslaved peoples be returned to their owners, even if they were living in a free state. This made the federal government responsible for hunting down and arresting black people. It's a pattern repeated today at the local level. Most Unitarian ministers in New England supported the Fugitive Slave Act because they thought it would prevent a civil war. To their thinking, it was better to keep people enslaved than do what it took to grant them freedom. So much for the inherent worthiness and dignity of all people. Another Unitarian president, Howard Taft, was anti-labor and allowed massive exploitation of mineral resources in Alaska. Perhaps the most influential pre-Civil War abolitionist was a Unitarian minister, Reverend Theodore Parker. We have something in common. My seminary training taught me that he was one of the greatest Unitarians of all time and the embodiment of Unitarian Universalist social justice He was militantly opposed to slavery. He famously wrote his sermons with a pistol in his desk because there was a price on his head due to his activism. But I later learned that Parker, while fervently working to have slavery abolished, believed black people were inferior to white people. He said they were childlike, docile, and unintelligent. Parker believed that the Anglo-Saxon race was the most highly evolved of all. Of Mexicans, Theodore Parker wrote in a personal letter that they were, quote, a wretched people, wretched in their origin, history, character, who must eventually give way as the Indians did. The contradictions of our faith even touch me personally. While in New England, I preached in the pulpits of Unitarian Universalist congregations that several generations back were active in the early genocide of Native Americans. While in seminary, I was the recipient of the oldest financial academic award in the country, the Hopkins Shareholder Award. Like Harvard itself, that award has financial roots in money raised in the slave trade. So my education and subsequent ministry are directly stained by America's original sin of white supremacy culture. So what do we do with this history? Should we embrace a cancel culture ethos, for instance, and never read Walt Whitman again? Should we ban the wisdom of Ralph Waldo Emerson because although supporting a woman's right to vote, he still referred to a difference between man thinking and woman thinking? Should we cancel the extraordinary legacy of Theodore Parker? And should we never again speak his famous quote, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice"? What do we do with our history? Should we cancel our ancestors? The criteria I use when thinking about our flawed ancestors is to ask two questions. The first, are the overwhelming majority of their contributions to our Unitarian Universalist faith in alignment with our current religious values? And second, did the majority of their contributions help or harm people in their day? And are the majority of their contributions helping or harming people today? You may disagree, but I believe Walt Whitman and Theodore Parker's overwhelming positive contributions far outweigh the flaws in their perceptions and the aspects of their beliefs that were products of their time. In the naming of Reverend Theodore Parker's past flaws, the Reverend Lily Nye writes, Parker's thoughts inevitably contain contradictions. He confessed things to friends that never appeared in his speeches. But as for Parker's bedrock beliefs, those beliefs did not change with his moods or the conditions of his society. I believe the public record solidly shows his commitment to universal rights and privileges for all people. I don't believe he would have worked himself to death speaking out relentlessly against injustice and inequity if he was not fundamentally committed to that vision. And let me say clearly, if a current Unitarian Universalist minister or poet wrote racist statements, I would not offer them such understanding. Because if someone is now actively hurting or harming people today, they should be evaluated by a very different criteria. And as for the many painful and shameful aspects of our Unitarian Universalist history that are blatant and explicit examples of racism, white primacy culture, sexism, and any other number of isms, we have to be honest about them. We have to shine a light on them. We need to own who we sometimes have been, or we will never grow and align more closely with our Unitarian Universalist values of independence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity. We need to be honest about the past in order to fully embrace the purpose of Unitarian Universalism, which is to actively engage in the transformation of the world through liberating love. Could we just say that last part? Actively engage in the transformation of the world through liberating love. As the Reverend Karen G. Johnson writes, let us be a people of not forgetting. Que así sea, bendito sea. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.